Lightweight versus aero for the sportive cyclist. Well, this has raged on since the beginning of time. Well, since we've had bicycles anyway. And there is a belief that aero trumps lightweight. But is that really true? So let's roll that intro and let's dive into it. Well, it's not as simple as it all may seem. And there is actually things that the marketing doesn't tell you which you need to consider. So let's have a look at the pros for aero and the pros for lightweight and also the cons for both of those different styles. And can we incorporate the two, or do we have to make a trade-off? Now, the main two things that people talk about is, you get aero benefit and aero trumps lightweight, but aero's not as comfy because the frames have to be made much more rigid due to the shape of the tubes that need to be designed on an aero bike. And the lightweight can be a little bit too light and feel a little bit noodly or flexy, and those sorts of bikes then feel like you're not getting all your power to the ground. But really, these two things are not really the main criteria that we need to consider when we're riding a bike, because compliance comes mostly from tyres and the wheels, and the stiffness of the frame comes with material around the bottom bracket and how the carbon's laid up. And both of those things with the modern bikes can be done pretty damn well. Now let's look at aero first. Now, if we look at aero, we need to look at two components. We need to look at the body, which is us, and we need to look at the bike. Now, if we can get ourselves into a more aero position and put out the same amount of watts, we're going to get our biggest bang for buck. And generally, bolt-on aero bars can do that. Of course, if you go to a bike fitter, you can really develop that position and get yourself into the most aero position you can, if you go to a wind tunnel as well, to maximize the amount of performance that you can get out of the bicycle and you, and the watts associated with your position. And that's probably the biggest gain you can get. And if you're looking at TT racing, time trial racing, or you do triathlons, that's probably something you really need to look at. Now, the second is the bicycle. Now, bicycles only going to have a 15 to 20% drag. So any percentage you improve the bicycle is only going to be a percentage of that 15 to 20%. So it's going to be small no matter what you change. Now, the frame itself, if it's a UCI regulatory frame, UCI since the 90s have limited the frame designs so they cannot get the best aero function out of the frame. But if you go to something like Ventium bikes or even the Cervelos that are not UCI compliant, you can see that those bikes are actually designed quite differently, and the UCI doesn't allow those. So you can get a lot of benefits from the frame if you go outside of the UCI regulations. But if your bike is a UCI regulation bike, your frame is not really going to do a lot, because the UCI rules has specifically been designed to limit aero benefits. Now, the two other areas where you can save is in your wheels. Now, a wheel causes a lot of drag. Spokes cause a lot of drag, and a wheel spinning. So the top of the wheel is going twice the speed of the bicycle. And because it's going twice the speed of the bicycle, the top of the wheel creates a lot of drag. So if you can increase the depth of the wheel and reduce the spoke, the amount of spoke area, you can get an aero advantage from the wheels. And when we talk about the depth, what we're doing is we're extending the cord across the wheel. So if the longer the cord, the longer the air can flow without being disturbed before it goes off the back of the wheel. So wheels are probably the biggest component on the bike that you can get some aero advantage. Now, the second biggest aero advantage is to narrow your handlebars. If you can ride your bike with 38mm handlebars, you can actually get quite a significant aero advantage. But that doesn't always suit all people. I've tried 38mm handlebars, and for me, like I'm not that fast anyway, and they're not that comfortable. So I had to go back out to about 40 mil. So we always need to consider, when we're looking at these aero benefits, we need to consider bike fit as well, because that kind of trumps aero. You've got to be comfortable and you've got to be able to put out the power. Lightweight. Now, lightweight is something that people keep going on about, the aero trumps lightweight. Now, aero only gives you advantage if you're riding by yourself or you're riding at the front and you're doing like a TT, so you're hitting fresh air. If you're riding in a group ride and you're not on the front, then really having an aero bike makes very, very little difference, because when you get into the slipstream of someone else, the saving you can have can approach 30%. And it's very, very noticeable if you've been in a group ride and then you go to the front. The amount of wattage that you need to put out is significantly more to maintain the same speed. So if you do a lot of group rides and you don't do a lot of riding on the front, really an aero frame is not going to give you a lot of benefits. Whilst a lightweight bike, it'll give you benefits everywhere. The bike is always lighter, it'll climb better, it feels more agile, especially when you're out of the saddle. And if you've ever ridden a really light bike with lightweight wheels, it just feels nicer to ride. But of course, you need to counter that to how heavy a rider you are. So if you're getting up to 100 kilos or more, you need to be a little bit careful on what type of components you put on your bike. Now, bikes currently have grown in weight over the last few years, and that's because of the push to go to disc brakes. Disc brakes are just inherently heavier than rim brakes. It's just, I know people can argue the point and they say disc brake wheels are lighter, but they aren't. You can't compare a disc brake wheel without the disc to a rim brake wheel, because the disc built into the wheel. And then you look at the group sets, they're much heavier than a rim brake grip set. And just to give you an example, go and check out Cam Nichols. He built up a Focus van bike and he used tubulars, SRAM 22 mechanical, and that bike was 6 kilos on the dot. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So you can build a rim brake bike really, really light. And when you ride those lightweight bikes, they feel really, really nice. Whilst to get a disc brake bike down to 6 kilos, you really have to use some pretty lightweight stuff out there. Well, in conclusion, really the difference between an aero frame, UCI compliant, and a lightweight frame, in the whole scheme of things, is going to be pretty marginal. And a lot of the things that we discuss about technology on bicycles is pretty marginal, because the output, the power to the bike and the amount of drag doesn't vary that much. So whether you buy a aero frame or you buy a lightweight climbing frame, the differences are not going to be significant. And if you put narrower handlebars on a lightweight bike and deep dish wheels, there's probably not much in it. Of course, if you really wanted to go down the aero path, I would suggest that you look at your position on the bike, and even maybe look at bikes that are not UCI compliant, because those bikes can be made a lot more aero. And I know Ventia make a bike that's very similar to the bikes that were made in the 90s, where the UCI, they what do you call it, relaxed the rules on aero frames, and they had some very, very fast bikes that were built in the 90s. So that's where it is, guys, and that's where I want to leave it. But my recommendation would be is go for a lightweight bike, unless you really like the look of the aero bikes, because there's always the coffee the coffee bragging rights. But that's where I'm going to leave it, guys. And now let's just jump into comments corner. Well, thanks guys for watching the channel and also leaving your comments down below. It's really appreciated and really helps me out and helps the channel out. Now, the first comment was, one owner bought a Seabear ceramic bottom bracket and he replaced it with a Hambini bottom bracket with just normal steel NTM bearings, and there was no noticeable difference. So that really shows that the steel bearings can be as good as the ceramic bearings. Obviously, that probably was just a feel, so it's not any scientific, but it just goes to show that it's not significant enough to feel any difference between a steel bearing and a ceramic bearing. And the second comment I wanted to bring up was one of the guys commented, and this was related to rim brakes in the wet weather, and he's got a set of Melenstein lightweights, and he was using the pads that were supplied for those specific wheels, and he said that the performance in the wet was really poor. And you know, it's a bit of a question mark, because I mean, I think they're some of the most expensive wheels you can buy on the market, and you would think that buying a wheel like that, there would be significant development and technology into the pads. So it's a little bit disappointing that the wet weather performance was not that bad. Or maybe even Lightweights could offer two different types of pads, one for the dry and one for the wet, so you could swap them over. But for that sort of money, I'm sure that they could offer, you know, two different types of pads, or a pad that can do both operations in the dry and the wet and still perform reasonably well. Yeah, and one guy commented, just use NTN bearings because they're used in the aircraft industry. And I've worked in the aircraft industry in the past. And if you haven't worked in the aircraft industry, you got to realize that the standard and the best practice that is used is far beyond normal industry. You can't just do things that you do with normal industry and just modify and fix things. The aircraft industry is best practice, and that's it, full stop. So if they're using something in an aircraft, there is a lot of checks and balances that go into the components. So if you're using a component that is designed for the aircraft industry, it is the premium product that would be on the market. Yeah, there's a company in Melbourne apparently called High Speed Ceramics, so a shout out for them. And they've been doing some ceramic bearing development for the last 12 months, and the results they're getting are pretty good. Now, obviously, I'm not familiar with this company, but it'd be interesting to see what this company puts out. And I might actually Google them and find out what that company does, because I know that there's some really good engineering done in Melbourne, and I know that there's a cycling manufacturer called Bastion Bikes, and they make some very, very slick bicycles over there. So if the guys are in Melbourne and are doing some of this work, I'd probably say that they would be at very high quality. But I'll check that out and I'll get back to you, and I'll try and give you an update on that. Yep, one guy basically commented, you're better off getting yourself a conditioning coach than spending your money on ceramic bearings. And he's probably right. If you can get yourself fitter and you can put out more watts, it's, you know, a ceramic bearing is probably only going to give you, like, you know, maybe 3 to 5 watts anyway. So if you can produce your performance by more than 5 or 10 watts, then you're getting a lot more speed, more than ceramic bearings offer. So that's a really good point. You know, work on yourself. Don't buy upgrades, write upgrades, as they say. Okay, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next vid. Cheers.